tell me your name, your rank at the time, and what you retired at?
Yeah, I was John Wilkinson. I was second lieutenant when I arrived at NKP. Got promoted to first lieutenant in January of 1969. I arrived October 18th of 68, departed October 10th of 69. I got promoted in January, and eventually, after 11 years of active duty, got off active duty, went into the reserves, and ended up as the senior reserve intelligence officer in the Air Force for 5 years as a brigadier general.
So, and you were intelligence the whole way?
The whole way.
And correct me if I'm wrong, when we were at Fort Walton Beach a couple of years ago, did you take a ride on a Skyreader at one point, go out on a mission, and somebody said, yeah, you can't do that?
Yeah. Yeah, actually.
Do you mind going into that?
No, yeah, well, that's things you do when you're younger and trying to understand what the pilots were going through and the environment in which they worked and flew. Yeah, in fact, I was talking last night to Rich Hall. I guess I could say his name since he's been out of the Air Force for a long time, but I had briefed Gene McCormick and Rich Hall on the last Firefly mission of whatever day it was. I can't remember. It would have been sometime in probably January, February timeframe of 69. And at the end of the briefing, and I was getting ready to pack things up and go back to my hooch, Rich said, hey, I got a two-seater. Do you want to go? I said, fuck yeah, I'd love to go. And so he says, well, go get your equipment out of PPE and meet me at the airplane, or meet me at the van, and then we'll go out to the airplane. So I go into get my equipment, and there's some sergeant sitting there. This is about 1800. It's already evening, and it's getting darker, and this guy says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah, I need a helmet. I need a survival vest. I need a mask, oxygen mask, and whatever else you got." And he goes, well, "Who exactly are you?" I said, "Well, I'm Lieutenant Wilkinson. I've got a flight here in about 20 minutes." So they give me a helmet and they give me the survival vest. He says, "You know how to work the radios, right?" I go, yeah, sure. He said, "Well, you push the button." I said, "Okay." And he said, "I don't have a mask for you because we don't have time to fit you. So see ya." So I show up. Rich says, "Okay, get in the airplane, get strapped in by the crew chief." And he says, "Where's your mask?" I said, "I don't have it." He says, "Well, just take the oxygen tube and just breathe in, just suck on it for a while, every once in a while." So didn't need it that much. But so we ended up actually near Lima Site 85. And it was a regular strike mission against suspected truck park, or tree pattern as we normally refer to it. And, it was interesting. Dropped bombs, fired rockets, fired the guns. I got sick as a dog. On the third pass, we had a hung bomb on my side, right side of the airplane. And we had the extender. You could see the bomb was still there. And we pulled off the first pass, and that bomb didn't go. So we came back again, and he tried a second time, and it didn't go. And the third time, he fired the guns, and that shook the gun loose. And as he's pulling off, he said, "Is it still there?" And as I looked over the side and down, I actually saw a sky. And when I looked up, I saw the ground, and my inner ear just went psst. And I was a uninvolved but highly interested participant from then on to what was going on. He fired the more guns and fired the rockets, and then we made it on home, and I bought everybody a drink at the Sandy Box. So.
And I'm betting, because you went with them, you probably had a greater bond with those guys later on because you understood it.
I felt that they say, the guys I've talked to who I was there with, the pilots, they say yes, that they felt that I was much more involved in what they were doing than some of the other guys who I worked with, in terms of they were briefing other missions like Steel Tiger or Jollies or the A-26s and that kind of stuff. And it gave me a really good understanding in that I discovered that there were a lot more mountains than I thought, The targets are much farther away. The photography we were given to work with was normally 5 to 6 months out of phase, so we were briefing off of photography that had trees on it when we were flying up in areas that didn't have much vegetation because it was a dry season. So, and also just the fact that while we took no ground fire on that mission, that it was a long way from home if things didn't work out. So, yeah, I felt I felt a great deal of camaraderie that way. And it also resulted eventually, the way the housing arrangements were made, each squadron had its own set of hooches, one set of hooches, and they were all air conditioned. There were two beds to a room, and the people at Task Force Alpha, which was separately funded by DOD, and this was McNamara's electronic fence for the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And I'd gone to Intel school with a couple of guys who were there. They all had air-conditioned hooches. Everybody else on the base didn't have an air-conditioned hooch. And then there was 4 to a room and that kind of stuff. So it was, when I first got there, they basically said, if you're not asleep by 8 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to get much rest because it gets hot, it gets noisy. And it was one of the few places I've ever been where the O Club served every meal any time of the day, so you could have breakfast, lunch, or dinner pretty much any time. And the bar was open pretty much all day. And so you'd have people coming in for dinner at 3 in the afternoon, and you had some drunk falling out of the bar at the same time and somebody having breakfast. So
very interesting.
It was different.
Early part of your career.
It was, yeah. It was different. It was interesting. And the interesting part, the subsequent part of the story was 2 days after the flight, my boss calls me into his office. He says, I understand you flew yesterday, didn't you? I said, no, sir, I didn't fly yesterday. I flew the day before yesterday. He goes, and what made you think that you could do that? I said, well, they had a 2-seater. He asked me, I went. He says, you do realize you have a top secret clearance and you're not supposed to be flying. I said, well, I guess I do now. So he said, no more of that stuff. Although stuff is not the S word he used, but yeah. So anyway, but he was fully in favor. Later on during my tour with him, this is Colonel Bob Lambert, he said, he'd come out of PACAF headquarters and he had intended to fly each of the missions as an intel guy, and he was prohibited from doing that by order of some general at PACAF. So he says, if I can't go, you can't go. Mm-hmm. So
I've seen a video clip of him once. It was in
great
Brian.
guy.
Oh,
great guy.
He's got one of the best lines ever when he said, if you want to live the American, or if you want to do the American story, you're going to have to bleed a little bit.
Yeah.
And he knew what it was about to be an American. He was
quite the guy, and he was a great mentor to me, and a very fair boss. And he was willing to take time to discuss one's mistakes and sort of say, okay, now that you know that you probably shouldn't have done it that way, things will be fine going forward. I always found him to be really, really supportive, and he felt like a kindred soul to me. So, although I had a lot more hair than he did.
That's funny. So, can you lead me through what your job was in intelligence and how you interacted with the Sky Raiders?
Well, yeah, I went through the intel school. It was at that time at Lowry Air Force Base. It's now at Goodfellow in Texas. It was Lowry outside of Denver. And at the time, I like to tell people it was about a 4-month course compressed into 8 months. But it was
drinking from the fire hose.
Well, it was drinking from the fire hose, but it was not. It was just little chunks each day. I mean, we went into 0600 and we were done by noon, because the enlisted guys enlisted troops had their training in the afternoon. But we were being trained at that time. Now it's two separate tracks, but at that time we were being trained in both air intelligence and photo intelligence, photo interpretation. So about half the course was photo interpretation. And having gone to Georgetown School of Foreign Service, because it didn't require math or science, I had to deal with things like vertical metrics and oblique metrics and, how to use a
Slide rule.
That's a word.
Yeah.
And, the kind of stuff that didn't come quite well to me. But the other thing that was very good was a lot of the courses on basically intelligence analysis, trend analysis, briefing skills, those kind of things. So that was that. I got my orders. I showed up at NKP. And funny story, I reported to the 602nd Squadron Building, and there was a sergeant there, and I said, I'm so-and-so, showed him my orders, I'm reporting for duty, and he said, okay, and he kind of looked, he went in and talked to the squadron commander. When I went in, saluted, said, Lieutenant Wilkinson reporting for duty, and he looks at me and goes, well, we weren't expecting you. I went, no? He said, no. He says, Sarge, do we even have an intelligence officer? And he said, yeah, they're over at the building, the TUOC, the Tactical Units Operations Center. So I got sent over there. I was told, well, since you're the 602nd, you're going to brief the barrel roll mission. There was a guy there who we overlapped by about a month, and I sort of understudied him. And then,
can you define the barrel roll mission?
Barrel roll is
Steel Tiger and barrel roll.
Right,
correct?
Steel Tiger and barrel roll is basically all of northern Laos, the fat part of northern Laos. Steel Tiger was the Ho Chi Minh Trail area, primarily. That was thought of as the Ho Chi Minh Trail area. And there was Tiger Hound, was way at the south near Cambodia, but people tended not to talk that way. So it all became kind of Steel Tiger this way, and all of this was barrel roll. So the mission of the 602nd was dual mission. One was Firefly call sign, where they flew strike missions, regular strike missions against targets, or they flew armed reconnaissance of the roads and looking for targets of opportunity. Or they were qualified to be forward air controllers for fast mover aircraft. So that was pretty complicated. It was kind of a set kind of mission, in that you briefed, well, this is your first, second, and third targets. Here's what we know about the area. Here's where we think the bad guys might be or are. Here's where ground fire has been reported. Here's your escape routes if anything happens and all that. And then they would get from the ops people who they were facking in if they were. So they would work that. By contrast, the Sandy mission was highly specialized. Is get in, suppress the enemy if he's there in any number, and get whoever's the survivors or survivors out. And that was I describe it as a mission that sort of grew up through tribal knowledge, where when I went to intel school, there was nothing on search and rescue in the syllabus. I don't think it may have been mentioned once or twice. Oh yeah, well the SAR forces will be orbiting down over here or something, because most of what we were trained on was fast mover strikes in North Vietnam. When I got there, the bombing pause was in effect, so we were working only Laos and all that. And doing the SAR mission. So the SAR missions, when there was a rescue on, my job was basically to confirm as much as we knew about the survivor at the time, what was the cause of the shoot down, or however it went down, where the enemy defenses would likely be in that area, any reactions at that point, till that point of the enemy defenses, and then best escape routes and that kind of stuff. And then during the course of the SAR, we would update that by listening in on the radios frequencies back in the command post.
So you were listening to the Kingbird?
No, we were listening to the actual. Well, we could hear King, but we were listening mostly to Sandy.
See, a lot of the SAR tapes that I've heard, I could hear King and I could hear Sandy. Could you hear the survivor on the ground as well?
No, we couldn't hear the Fox mic.
Okay. All right. I was wondering if anybody had that other than the direct connection between Sandy and the survivor.
Right, no. No, we certainly did. We could hear Sandy talking to the Jollies, and we could hear Sandy talking to Sandy 2, for example.
So you had a mental picture of what was going on in the situation?
A general picture, yes. I mean, that we could tell, obviously, if there was serious enemy reaction to the SAR and any particular difficulties. I remember one SAR, and I can't remember who got shot down, but we listened to the Jolly go into the hover, drop the PJ, and the PJ found that the survivor was not a survivor; he was actually dead. And as they were bringing up the PJ, the line broke, and they had to pull off without him, and that was not an easy one to listen to. So.
I was listening to the guys send me SAR tapes all the time, and I'll be working and I'll just be listening. It's trying to familiarize myself with that. And it was a very similar situation where they had been looking for a survivor, and they had lost contact with him, and somebody found him, and the it had to be the door gunner said, "PJ, out the door, here he is, we've got him." And you can hear the beeper going off, and they start taking fire, and you can hear the miniguns going, and they get him in, and they're taking off, and you hear this elation that the survivor's on board, and everybody's high.
Right, yeah.
And then you hear the pilot of the helicopter say, "Give us an update, PJ." And he said, "Oh my God, they shot him in the head." And you could feel the whole, I mean, the audio, it just collapsed.
Right.
And then it became business. There was a moment of celebration, and I started thinking about what was it like day to day to perform that task on those highs and those lows, because I've asked a few of the guys what it was like, and they said the highest high.
Yeah.
And the lowest low.
Yeah, no, we couldn't hear those kind of inside the airplane transmissions or whatever. We could hear, obviously, if the Jolly was talking back to King or whatever. But no, you're right. I mean, the range of emotions in a single day during a SAR could be great. It could be really down, and and then they'd get it all together and get ready for the next day. So, which was really what impressed me was the utter professionalism of both the Jollies and all of the crews there, and of course especially the 602nd, but the professionalism of a bunch of guys that have been kind of thrown together, by the personnel system. And you had some guys who really did a great job, who were first lieutenants. You got guys who did, okay jobs. And the system, I thought, was really in many ways, such a good merit-based system. And when it came to the Sandy mission, I mean, you could have a Sandy low lead who was a first lieutenant, like Jim George on Boxer 22 Alpha. You could have then a full colonel step in and be Sandy low lead the next day. But they were Sandy low leads and on the Sandy 1 through 4 because they had proven that they could, obviously they were really good pilots, that they were pretty steady, but that they could adapt to rapidly changing circumstances both effectively and without worrying too much about, well, should I be doing this or not? They just did it. And that was a great, I tell everybody, it was my best and worst tour ever. Best because of the guys I got to work with and learn from, and worst because we lost so many people. So.
Let's go to the good point. When they brought a survivor home, I hear of these survivor parties.
Yeah, well,
But you had to celebrate each victory.
Yeah, it was much like a refined tea afternoon at some girls' college, mostly. But it changed over time. When I got there, they had a big jolly green doll, if you would, behind the bar with a placard hanging on its chest, and it was a number, and that was to be the number of rescues to date, of people rescued to date. And they would bring the survivor back, unless they had been ordered to take them somewhere else, like Udorn possibly, but normally they brought them back to NKP, had the doctors check them out, and then there'd be some excuse for keeping them overnight. And then they'd end up, somehow they find their way to the officers' club, to the bar. And at one point or another, they would be helped over the bar so they could change the number. Sometimes the help was, here, let's help you over. Sometimes they'd pick them up and throw them over the bar, and they'd change the number, and everybody would be cheering. So there were a couple of instances where there was a bad landing on the other side of the bar by the survivor, and it got to the point where but the squadrons were told to tone it down a bit. So, but everybody let off steam. Everybody was having a great time, assuming that, we had the survivor there. And then you'd get up and do it the next day.
I imagine that helped balance the emotion, because coming up out of the lows, when you lost somebody and you knew they weren't coming back, and it wasn't just a thud pilot. Sometimes they lost their own men,
right?
Their own teammates. Were you there for any of those? You were there for Zeke, weren't you, Zeke and Cenas?
No, I was there for. During the year I was there, we actually lost almost in the 602nd, almost 18% of the pilots. Now, that's assuming that in a year you have 60 pilots roughly transition through the squadron. And during the course of the year that I was there, we lost about 18%.
Wow.
Of 60.
That's a lot of people.
A lot of people.
And
a lot of good people.
Yeah. What else can you tell me about your experience over there? Was there any funny moments that, other than your personal, why not? Let's go for a ride.
Yeah, why not? You got a seat, let's go. Funny. Yeah, there were some good parties. We had the Sandy Bar, and this sort of goes to part of this thing. The Sandy Bar, the Sandy Box, was the last, when I arrived at the squadron, was the last hooch in the row. And then, along with the Zorros, the 22nd, they were across the grassy area from us. We built the Sierra Hotel, which was as you've seen pictures of it, larger room with a refrigerator, bar, and so forth, and dartboard and all that. So then the Sandy Box was turned back into a room for two people, and room opened up, and at that point I'd been moving around because they kept moving our rooms all the time, because somebody said, we need your room for this. So the four of us, and we're all four Intel guys from the work together, we'd have to move somewhere else. And I remember one day briefing, and it was middle of hot season, and I hadn't had much sleep, and somebody said, well, you look terrible. I said, well, I didn't sleep much last night. Well, what do you mean you didn't sleep much? Don't you have an air-conditioned room? I said, no. I said, I'm in a top bunk looking across the hooches that were not air-conditioned. The partition walls began 1 foot above the ground, above the floor, and ended about 9 feet up. So if you were in the top bunk, which I was, if you sat up on your bunk, you could look all across the entire building, because there was, this kind of roof. And you could hear everything that was going on in every room. And of course, everybody was working different shifts, and it wasn't, air conditioned, anything like that. So they actually said, well, hey, you're one of us. You should be living with us. And as it turned out, I was pretty sure I was the only intel officer assigned to a squadron who was actually living with their squadron, which was great.
It's a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
I noticed when we were at Fort Walton Beach, I don't know how often you and Jim had run into each other, Jim George.
I hadn't seen Jim at Fort Walton Beach. I had not seen him for 51 years.
I assumed that because his first question to you when he smiled and shook your hand, he said, "Did you have a good career?"
Yeah.
And that was his first question. And I started looking, and it dawned on me that everybody was in a place, and then they wound up spread out.
Everywhere else, yeah.
How do you feel about the reunions now?
They're great. I mean, they're really good. It's I saw Rich Hall just before I came up here, and was telling him about Colonel Lambert chewing me out politely, not really politely, chewing me out about flying with him, and he said, "You didn't tell him my name, did you?"
Rich is such a character.
Yeah.
Tell him my name.
No, you didn't tell him who it was, did you? I said, well, I may have. I don't know.
Oh my goodness.
But no, it's great to see these guys. A lot of them I didn't know because they were either way after us or me or before. But it's it's like people say, you have some friends that you can pick up a conversation 17 years later and at the same point where you ended it 17 years before. And a lot of it's like that. I mean, you just you catch up with people and you don't have to do a whole lot of explaining. You just say, "So what have you been doing?" And, yada, yada, and a little bit of memory lane stuff. But it's a very, still 53 years now, very compatible crowd.
I'm amazed by the Brotherhood and the way you can pick that up. Every time I come here, I look at it from outside where I live, and then I'm watching what I see, and it is two different worlds. Outside the corporate world, you may see somebody and kind of look at them strange and go, "I think I know you."
Right, yeah.
And you watch two guys that serve together, boy, I mean, it's a beeline.
And I feel privileged that they include me in this because I don't know of any other intel guy, for example. And I say intel because obviously you got some guys here who are crew chiefs, enlisted guys, maintainers, that kind of stuff, armorers. But even though I was not on the flight line or in the airplane, they've included me, and it's I felt that way when I was there. I mean, I felt like it was my pilots. In fact, at one point I talked to my boss about extending for 6 months, and I was, of course, I had my girlfriend, now my wife. We were planning on getting married and all that. I said, "Well, I shouldn't say this if she watches this, but." The boss said, "Oh, you're supposed to go home and get married." I said, "Well, yeah, we can sort of work that out, and sort of postpone it a little bit." And I said, "But I really feel I need to stay, because of these guys." And he said, "I understand." He said, "But," he says, "you got to think about something. Every one of these guys, with a couple exceptions maybe, when their year is up, they'll go home." He said, "Your year is up. You should go home."
That's wise advice, but I can also see your side.
Yeah, it got very. I guess looking back, and I was a little bit of a mother hen towards these guys. Not that they needed it, but I felt that they were the last guy that talked to that before they flew, who had the kind of information that unless there was a SAR, an emergency SAR, then they'd get updated over the radio or something. But yeah, I mean, it's and I felt that way because they were so open with me and so accepting, even though I was as every once in a while they say, "Well, you're for a strap hanger, you're not a bad guy." So
that's okay for the people who don't know what a strap hanger is.
Well, when you're riding in the bus and you're standing up, you're holding onto a strap, right? So somebody's driving and it ain't you.
That's fantastic.
So,
I had not heard that used in this context,
Really?
but that's pretty good. No, I've heard it used several other places,
Right.
so that's pretty good. Did you ever have to pull and work intelligence on any of the Prairie Fire missions when the guys?
no, actually, because those were all being run on Steel Tiger. I sat through a couple of the briefings, and those are large. I mean, the size of the briefings in terms of the people, number of crews that were in that was pretty large, because you had the knife helicopter guys, usually the pilot, co-pilot, and possibly the crew chief, and there were usually at least two of them, sometimes four. You had the escort hobos, all were in there. And one of the reasons I wanted to sit in is because they were really they were like our briefings for strikes, but they were sort of a combination of in depth, and the depth of the information between what we did for strike packet, for strike mission, and then what we would do for SAR. It was kind of combining the two, because they expected, they didn't anticipate, or they didn't expect it, they anticipated enemy reaction.
Yes.
And I remember through both that I sat through very vividly, there was one guy in a different uniform sitting towards the back of the room looking very quiet, and that was the Army guy who was leading in the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, boy, I mean, this guy, he doesn't have the best job in the world, And that's what we used to say sometimes, no matter how bad your war is, somebody's having a much worse war.
I had not heard that. That is a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
For your personal morale.
Right.
Because sometimes you can get tunnel vision.
Right. Yeah. No matter how bad it gets, somebody's having a worse war right now. So.
I've been fortunate enough to interview a few of those Green Beret guys, and it was funny because I was watching their interaction with some Skyraider pilots, and they were both comparing who was the craziest. And the Green Berets were like, "I was on the ground, I was fine. Yeah, I needed your support, but you were crazy." He said everybody in that valley was shooting at you when you came over, and the pilots were like, "I wasn't getting out of that plane for anything." He says, "You're the crazy."
Yeah,
But to watch them now.
It's right. It's all about perspective.
Have you ever been invited to go to one of the special operations reunions?
I've not been. No. I mean, I know several guys. I know several. I went through Defense Intelligence School with 3 SEALs, all of whom had been to Vietnam and were leaving to go to Cambodia. Wow. I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, they ended up in Cambodia.
Well, we wound up everywhere.
Yeah, we wound up everywhere. And talking to those guys, it was like, I'm glad you think that's fun, but,
Well, do you know what their casualty rate was?
They were, no, short answer, no. It was not, quote, bad. I actually served in the Pentagon with a guy who was a Marine Corps long-range reconnaissance, and he was. I guess we were both lieutenant colonels at the time. And I was just chatting with him. I said, and he'd been at Quezon as a Marine, but had then left the Marines and decided he was going to go somewhere safer, and he went into the Air Force. Go figure. And he was an intel puke. Intel guy, excuse me. We refer ourselves as puke and pukettes sometimes. But anyway, he said, yeah, he'd been at Quezon and he was in long-range patrol. And I said, well, how far north were you normally? Because he said they went north. Oh, maybe 40 clicks or so? I said, you mean north of the DMZ? No, 40 clicks from Hanoi. And he said there were a couple instances when he and his team were up north that they got diverted to try to pick up a survivor from a shoot down. And he said they wore boots with tire track soles and stuff like that.
They were very sterile.
To replicate, yeah. They used there were no U.S. weapons, and those guys, they were a different breed.
They are.
And this guy he's a really quiet guy, except if you said the wrong thing. Sometimes you get a little upset. But it was, you look at these guys and you go, whew, how do we breed people like this? So, how do we make people like this in this country who'll do that?
Every time I've read one of those books or talked to one of those guys, I've thought the same thing.
Yeah.
Where do we come up? That's like the top 1% of the top 1%
Yeah.
in the warrior breed.
Yeah.
And they'll go out, when I was asking you about the casualty rate, I know the Mac VSOG guys, they were 100% casualty. When they went out, it was either dead or wounded, and you were lucky if you were wounded.
Yeah.
But it was fierce.
It was bad news, but but at the same time, and I've said this before, that my time at with the 602nd, well, the whole 56th Wing, is those are the bravest men I've ever served with. But
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to speak about, John?
I think I've said enough.
I like the way you ended that. That was very nice.
Well, they still are, to me.